All right. Part 2, how I split it up. Although Morgenstern, and by extension Goldman, split it up quite differently. Here we are. The first morning after Wesley's departure, Buttercup thought she was entitled to do nothing more than sit around moping and feeling sorry for herself. After all, the love of her life had fled. Life had no meaning. How could you face the future, etc., etc.? But after about 2 seconds of that, she realized that Wesley was out in the world now, getting nearer and nearer to London. And what if a beautiful city girl caught his fancy while she was just back here mouldering? Or worse, what if he got to America and worked his jobs and built his farm and made their bed and sent for her, and when she got there, he would look at her and say, "I'm sending you back. That moping has destroyed your eyes. The self-pity has taken your skin. You're a slobby-looking creature. I'm marrying an Indian girl who lives in a teepee nearby and is always in the peak of condition." Buttercup ran to her bedroom mirror. "Oh, Wesley," she said, "I must never disappoint you." And she hurried downstairs to where her parents were squabbling. 16 to 13, and not past breakfast yet. "I need your advice," she interrupted. "What can I do to improve my personal appearance?" "Start by bathing," her father said. "And do something with your hair while you're at it," her mother said. "Unearth the territory behind your ears." "Neglect not your knees." "That will do nicely for starters," Buttercup said. She shook her head. "Gracious, but it isn't easy being tidy." Undaunted, she set to work. Every morning she awoke, if possible by dawn, and got the farm chores finished immediately. There was much to be done now, with Wesley gone, and more than that, ever since the Count had visited, everyone in the area had increased his milk order. So there was no time for self-improvement until well into the afternoon. But then she really set to work. After a good cold bath, then, while her hair was drying, she would slave after fixing her figure faults. One of her elbows was just too bony, the opposite wrist not bony enough, and exercise what remained of her baby fat. Little left now, she was nearly 18, and brush her hair. Her hair was the colour of autumn, and it had never been cut, so 1,000 strokes took time, but she didn't mind, because Wesley had never seen it clean like this, and wouldn't he be surprised when she stepped off the boat in America? Her skin was the colour of wintry cream, and she scrubbed every inch well past glistening, and that wasn't much fun really, but wouldn't Wesley be pleased with how clean she was as she stepped off the boat in America? And very quickly now, her potential began to be realised. From 20th, she jumped within 2 weeks to 15th, an unheard-of change in such a time. But 3 weeks after that, she was already 9th and moving. The competition was tremendous now, but the day after she was 9th, a 3-page letter arrived from Wesley in London, and just reading it over put her up to 8th. That was really what was doing it for her more than anything. Her love for Wesley would not stop growing, and people were dazzled when she delivered milk in the morning. Some people were only able to gape at her, but many talked, and those that did found her warmer and gentler than she had ever been before. Even the village girls would nod and smile now, and some of them would ask after Wesley, which was a mistake unless you happened to have a lot of spare time, because when someone asked Buttercup how Wesley was, well, she told them. He was supreme, as usual. He was spectacular. He was singularly fabulous. Oh, she could go on for hours. Sometimes it got a little tough for the listeners to maintain strict attention, but they did their best, since Buttercup loved him so completely. Which was why Wesley's death hit her the way it did. He had written to her just before he had sailed for America. The Queen's Pride was his ship, and he loved her. That was the way his sentences always went. "It is raining today, and I love you. My cold is better, and I love you. Say hello to horse, and I love you. Like that. Then there were no letters, but that was natural. He was at sea. Then she heard. She came home from delivering the milk, and her parents were wooden. Off the Carolina coast, her father whispered. Her mother whispered, Without warning, at night. What? From Buttercup. Pirates, said her father. Buttercup thought she had better sit down. Quiet in the room. He's been taken prisoner, then? Buttercup managed. Her mother made a no. It was Roberts, her father said. The dread pirate Roberts. Oh, Buttercup said. The one who never leaves survivors. Yes, her father said. Quiet in the room. Suddenly Buttercup was talking very fast. Was he stabbed? Did he drown? Did they cut his throat to sleep? Did they wake him, do you suppose? Perhaps they whipped him dead. She stood up then. I'm getting silly, forgive me. She shook her head. As if the way they got him mattered. Excuse me, please. With that she hurried to her room. She stayed there many days. At first, her parents tried to lure her, but she would not have it. They took to leaving food outside her room, and she took bits and shreds, enough to stay alive. There was never noise inside, no wailing, no bitter sounds. And when she at last came out, her eyes were dry. Her parents stared up from their silent breakfast at her. They both started to rise, but she put a hand out and stopped them. I can care for myself, please. And she set about getting some food. They watched her closely. In point of fact, she had never looked as well. She had entered her room as just an impossibly lovely girl. The woman who emerged was a trifle thinner, a great deal wiser, an ocean sadder. This one understood the nature of pain, and beneath the glory of her features there was character and a sure knowledge of suffering. She was 18. She was the most beautiful woman in 100 years, and she didn't seem to care. You're all right? Her mother asked. Buttercup sipped her cocoa. Fine, she said. You're sure? Her father wondered. Yes, Buttercup replied. There was a very long pause. But I must never love again. And she never did. Part 2, officially, which is called The Groom. This is my first major excision. Chapter 1, The Bride, is almost in its entirety about the bride. Chapter 2, The Groom, only picks up Prince Humperdinck in the last few pages. This chapter is where my son Jason stopped reading, and there is simply no way of blaming him, for what Morgenstern has done is open this chapter with 66 pages of Florinese history. More accurately, it is the history of the Florinese crown. Dreary, not to be believed. Why would a master of narrative stop his narrative dead before it has much chance to begin generating? No known answer. All I can guess is that for Morgenstern, the real narrative was not Buttercup and the remarkable things she endures, but rather the history of the monarchy and other such stuff. When this version comes out, I expect every Florinese scholar alive to slaughter me. Columbia University has not only the leading Florinese experts in America, but also direct ties to the New York Times Best Review. The New York Times Book Review. I can't help that, and I only hope that they understand my intention here. My intentions here are in no way meant to be destructive of Morgenstern's vision. Prince Humperdinck was shaped like a barrel. His chest was a great barrel chest, his thighs mighty barrel thighs. He was not tall, but he weighed close to 250 pounds, brick hard. He walked like a crab, side to side, and probably if he had wanted to be a ballet dancer, he would have been doomed to a miserable life of endless frustration. But he didn't want to be a ballet dancer. He wasn't in that much of a hurry to be king either. Even war, at which he excelled, took second place in his affections. Everything took second place in his affections. Hunting was his love. He made it a practice never to let a day go by without killing something. It didn't much matter what. When he first grew dedicated, he killed only big things, elephants or pythons. But then, as his skills increased, he began to enjoy the suffering of little beasts, too. He could happily spend an afternoon tracking a flying squirrel across forests or a rainbow trout down rivers. Once he was determined, once he had focused on an object, the prince was relentless. He never tired, never wavered, neither ate nor slept. It was death chess, and he was international Grand Master. Grand Master? Yeah. It was death chess, and he was international Grand Master. In the beginning, he traversed the world for opposition, but travel consumed time, ships and horses being what they were, and the time away from Florin was worrying. There always had to be a male heir to the throne, and as long as his father was alive, there was no problem. But someday his father would die, and then the prince would be the king, and he would have to select a queen to supply an heir for the day of his own death. So, to avoid the problem of absence, Prince Humperdinck built the Zoo of Death. He designed it himself with Count Rugen's help, and he sent his hirelings across the world to stock it for him. It was kept brimming with things that he could hunt, and it really wasn't like any other animal sanctuary anywhere. In the first place, there were never any visitors, only the albino keeper to make sure the beasts were properly fed and that there was never any sickness or weakness inside. The other thing about the zoo was that it was underground. The prince picked the spot himself in the quietest, remotest corner of the castle grounds, and he decreed that there were to be 5 levels, all with the proper needs for his individual enemies. On the first level, he put enemies of speed, wild dogs, cheetahs, hummingbirds. On the second level belonged the enemies of strength, anacondas and rhinos and crocodiles of over 20 feet. The third level was for poisoners, spitting cobras, jumping spiders, death bats galore. The fourth level was the kingdom of the most dangerous, the enemies of fear, the shrieking the shrieking tarantula, the only spider capable of sound, the blood eagle, the only bird that thrived on human flesh, plus, in its own black pool, the sucking squid. Even the albino shivered during the feeding time on the 4th level. The 5th level was empty. The prince constructed it in the hopes of someday finding something worthy, something as dangerous and fierce and powerful as he was. Unlikely. Still, he was an eternal optimist, so he kept the great cage of the 5th level always in readiness. And there was really more than enough that was lethal on the other 4 levels to keep a man happy. The prince would sometimes choose his prey by luck. He had a great wheel with a spinner, and on the outside of the wheel was a picture of every animal in the zoo, and he would twirl the spinner at breakfast, and wherever it stopped, the albino would ready that reed. Sometimes he would choose by mood. "I feel quick today. Fetch me a cheetah." Or, "I feel strong today. Release a rhino." And whatever he requested, of course, was done. He was ringing down the curtain on an orangutan when the business of the king's health made its ultimate intrusion. It was mid-afternoon, and the prince had been grappling with the giant beast since morning, and finally, after all these hours, the hairy thing was weakening. Again and again, the monkey tried to bite, a sure sign of failure of strength in the arms. The prince warded off the attempted bites with ease, and the ape was heaving at the chest now, desperate for air. The prince made a crab-like step sideways, then another, then darted forward, spun the great beast into his arms, began applying pressure to the spine. This was all taking place in the ape pit, where the prince had his pleasure with many simians. From up above now, Count Rugen's voice interrupted. "There is news," the count said. From battle, the prince replied, "Cannot it wait?" "For how long?" asked the count. Crack! The orangutan fell like a rag doll. "Now what is all this?" the prince replied, stepping past the dead beast, mounting the ladder out of the pit. "Your father has had his annual physical," the count said. I have the report. And? Your father is dying. Drat, said the prince. That means I shall have to get married. And that's the end of part 2 for now. I'll see you next week. Good day.